He was complimentary. Your stores are neat and clean. Your staff are neat. But with one big caveat. Hello and welcome to My Tiny Bottles, the project where I'm exploring my grandmother's legacy of miniature liquor bottles, one tiny bottle at a time. I'm your host, Tammy Coxon. Bottle number 122 is the Singleton of Auchroisk, a single malt Scotch distilled in 1975. When I discovered this bottle in Reveal 22, I was a little confused by the date because vintage years aren't common in Scotch, but it was indeed distilled in 1975. It was distilled at the Auchroisk distillery in the Speyside region of Scotland. Auchroisk was built in 1972 by International Distillers and Vintners, or IDV, as a model of what a modern distillery could be. IDV was a liquor conglomerate that has appeared in many My Tiny Bottles episodes. At the time, they were the owners of bottle number 95, J&B, a blended Scotch whiskey designed for the U.S. market and which had booming sales in the 1970s. Some of the malt whiskey produced at Auchroisk went into J&B, but beginning in 1986, they also began releasing it as a single malt. Apparently, it was called the Singleton because they were worried that Auchroisk would be too difficult for people to pronounce. And I did look up some actual Scottish people saying it before I recorded this episode. One of the most interesting things I learned about Auchroisk is that they were the first to use a now familiar two-part aging process. Their malt whiskey was aged in ex-bourbon barrels, typically for about 10 years, then was transferred to Oloroso sherry casks for another 2 years of finishing. This is very common today, but was innovative at the time. However, despite being the first to use this technique, Auchroisk and IDV never talked up their aging process. So Balvenie and Glenmorangie got the credit for the technique, even though they weren't the first to do it. Being an also-ran seems to have been the brand's fate. The Singleton won awards and was critically acclaimed, but it never really took off with consumers. In 2001, the Singleton of Auchroisk brand disappeared. Then in 2006, under new owner Diageo, they started using the Singleton part of the name for a line of malt whiskeys from 3 different distilleries. My Tiny Bottle was most likely bottled around 1986, since 1975 was the first vintage of the Singleton. But internet sources for similar bottles say 1986 to very early 90s, so it could have been up to a few years later. The earliest reference I can find to them bottling the 1976 vintage is from 1989. My bottle of the Singleton was packaged in a box. That box is really quite beat up now, but there's a price tag on the top. And beneath the printed $3.15 price is the word vintages in red script. I knew that word might help me pin down a date for this bottle, since it ties into the story about the history of the Liquor Control Board of Ontario, LCBO, that I told in my episode about Bottle 121, McGuinness Creme de Menthe. As I explained there, in 1969, the LCBO started shifting their model from one where you'd order at a counter to one where shoppers could browse and pick out their own bottles. It took about 20 years for them to shift all the stores, but even before that was complete, they had continued to innovate in other ways. In the mid-1980s, with the LCBO under new leadership, they asked Gary Reinblatt, president of marketing at McDonald's, to assess the stores. He was complimentary. Your stores are neat and clean. Your staff are neat. But with one big caveat. But God, you're dull. I'd almost label you as deliberately dull. So in the mid-1980s, they set about to change that. And one of the major ways they did that was by introducing vintages outlets beginning in 1985. These were either standalone stores or a boutique section within an existing store, offering hundreds of carefully selected wines and higher-end spirits with in-store tastings. A 1986 article about the newly opened Vintages boutique section in Windsor reported that the selection included a dozen single malt Scotch whiskies, the pure unblended ones. Given the timing, one of those might even have been a bottle of the Singleton like Grandma's. I'm looking forward to tasting this one. The only other single malt in Grandma's collection so far was bottle number 59, the Glenlivet. Brett Adams and I tasted it, and we both thought it was delicious. And since the same malt whiskey in the Singleton was a blending whiskey for J&B, might be fun to taste those two side by side. Be sure to subscribe so you'll catch that episode when it comes around. Have you tasted any vintages of the Singleton?
Tell me about it in the comments below
or on mytinybottles.com or on social media. I'm Tammy LC on Blue Sky and at My Tiny Bottles on Facebook and Instagram. Cheers!